Hey everybody, it's the Last Robokai here, and it is time for the second video of the Dark Eldar for Dawn of War Soulstorm. We're doing, as we did with the Sisters, a Stronghold mission, and the closest mission for the Dark Eldar is the Chaos Stronghold. This was a mistake. I've made a great and terrible mistake. Look at the length of this video and you will understand that I have grabbed you by your ear, whispered gently into it, "It is a mistake," and then just slowly just sunk into like the shadows of this Stronghold mission and pulled you down with me. And my other hand is firmly latched to my co-commentary cohort, as always. Cool guy.
I'm feeling like this is a Yu-Gi-Oh episode somewhere. Like we're all going into the Shadow Realm.
There's at least we're not doing it with at least what we're doing is like saw blades. It was like that.
God.
These rotating saw blades will send you straight to the Shadow Realm. Wouldn't they kill me first? Yes. You're actually killing you. We're not allowed to say that on Funimation, though. Anyway.
Oh my god.
I'm suddenly reminded of the fact that there are like children's books set in Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k.
That is a true story now. That is a true story now.
We live in the weirdest timeline. Anyway, I should probably not be dragging this out any further. So let's get stuck straight in. Yeah, we're back on the battle map, and there it is. The biggest problem for all of this is simply the fact that either side, just webway gates. There's not too much to enjoy about this. And I still can't believe that the Alpha Legion are the enemy we're going to be fighting, because my god, you'll watch the video, you'll watch this intro, and you'll wonder just what super crack they were smoking. It's it's bad. It's good for literally any other faction aside from the Alpha Legion. Karen, I said before, Karen is famous for a very good reason, alongside all the other meme lords.
Little was ever uncovered, and little will ever be known of how the warp storm was unleashed on the Kaurava system's fourth habitable planet. Whether guardsmen there grew corrupt and turned to evil worship, or whether the storm took them unawares, is an open question. What is without doubt is that at the storm's eye lay the lair of the Chaos Space Marines. And at the heart of this lair, a network of unholy and blood-stained shrines, linked somehow inextricably to the storm itself. Although the lethal warp storm would flicker and squall here and there, ever shifting, a permanent conduit to the warp was maintained between these shrines. A charged field of immateria whirled there, certain death to any who had not given themselves over fully to chaos. In that radiant, deadly energy field, strange shapes could be seen dancing, screaming, howling. Any would-be conqueror of this unholy citadel would somehow have to dispel the chaos field that protected it. To enter it would be certain death, and while it stood, nothing could reach the forces of chaos that lurked at its center.
They come!
They come!
Yes, we feel them! They approach! Their blood shall flow at our feet! Blood for the blood god! Yes! We shall slake our thirst for death! For chaos! For terror! Yes!
They draw near. Let them come. The very ground will poison you. Demons will appear from the warp when your back is turned. We shall lash out from every direction, and yours shall be the cries of death and horror.
The sound of your doom will ring in your skull, in your soul. You shall tremble, and your blood shall be a gift to the Blood God. Let them come. We are ready.
Yeah, alright.
Yeah, it took everything I had not to laugh every time someone just yelled "come" dramatically. So
God.
here's why this stronghold isn't a very fun stronghold compared to like the other strongholds in the game, because you can eke a bit of fun out of all of the strongholds, really. Our objective is to take care of 5 Chaos Shrines that are dotted around the map. You might have noticed at the very beginning, though, it noted that the dead center of the map is where the Chaos Stronghold is. So here's where the problem kind of lies. We're going to be having to try and move around this giant base that has a large energy field resting over the top of it, and this large energy field makes it so that all the Chaos buildings and units inside of it regen their health very quickly, so you can't just, like, you know, long range snipe this stronghold and be done with it. Like, you know, at least they thought about that part. But it also does damage to any of your units that go inside of it.
Right.
Here's the problem. The pathfinding for Dawn of War does not ever put into consideration that sort of thing. So you're going to having to be trying to micromanage your troops around these hell zones, as well as trying to avoid getting like any of your units walking into them, you know, with Dawn of War pathfinding. Wrestling troops away who might be long range enough to start shooting at these things they see, like, in the distance. And just generally just having to do a lot more micro on trying to keep your force together so that you can actually fight the enemy threats. So, like, a lot of unnecessary micro becomes, like, a big facet of this particular stronghold. Even worse, because a lot of these shrines are behind the stronghold, the enemy will be able to send troops directly towards your base without ever even remotely encountering your forces, and you have to double back. Because they can just spawn units they want and just send them out. So you have to use your troops to bring them back around, and again, you've got to go around the stronghold and get to where you need to go. So it is, and considering further, destroying each of these shrines spawns enemy troops for you to fight. All over the map there's things to fight. There's the Chaos Forces are absolutely just, like, swarmed across this map. It is an extremely just difficult map to deal with at the best of times. Now, add in the fact that in terms of defensive structures, the Dark Eldar just don't have any. They have a listening post that's slightly stronger than an average listening post because it's got more guns, but that does not help it against the firepower that the Chaos Forces will bring. They can chew through that and then start chewing through the rest of your buildings fairly quickly with only, like, 2 Chaos Space Marine squads, a Cultist squad, and a Predator. Like, they can do massive damage to you, and while your forces are fairly quick, you're still trying to micro your dudes around this. And so,
Right.
like, I did a test run of this battle when I wasn't recording, just to figure out, like, what I would probably need to do for when I was actually showing it off for everybody, and I'm glad I did, because otherwise this would have been a frustrating experience. And so, what we're going to be seeing is I'm going to just slowly build up my forces, stay in a single defensive position here, because for the most part, the Forces of Chaos cannot attack your base by any other laneway except, like, the single one that's practically at the foot of their stronghold as much as it is at the foot of, like, your command posts. And and I'm just, well, I'll let everyone see it when it comes. But needless to say, in terms of, like, design, I feel like this one didn't consider too much the weaknesses of Dawn of War as much as its, like, strengths. You know, like, it didn't consider the weakness of the pathfinding, it didn't consider the problems with targeting and things like that. It might have been better to either have the stronghold, as most strongholds are, at the back of the base, have a direct line to it, but you have to go off on these side paths to take care of the shrines, because otherwise that thing's going to be just sending troops directly towards you. Because that way, if you're butting up against it like an enemy base or a shrine or whatever, and you start seeing them sending troops there, or the troops are at your gates, you can just double back quickly and go deal with it, instead of having to try and, frenziedly micromanage your dudes around an objective to get back to your base. And I feel like that would have been a lot fairer. It's easy to complain about, like, systems when they get implemented in games and be like, oh, that's not a fair system, and, that's bad. But at the same time, it's like you don't consider the design behind it. But I feel like in this regard, at least, I've considered what makes this so problematic to deal with as a player, and why it's honestly not really that fun, specifically for the Dark Eldar on this Stronghold.
I mean, like the difference between somebody who has a valid complaint and somebody who's just complaining to complain is that the person who has a valid complaint will generally tell you what they would have done different, which is exactly what you just did. And I'll give you an even simpler one that was used multiple times in this in this series. Either make a impassable wall that has gates, and that is the surrounding for the what is it called, like the field that you're dealing with, or put it up on a plateau. Like, it's just one of those two things. Either one would be fine, but like that is how a number of RTS games have handled this exact problem. Even StarCraft 1 handled this exact problem this way. Just by saying, okay, it's on high ground. Like, if you want to try to go up it, I guess technically you can, but you're gonna have a really bad time. Like, it's about 1,000 times easier to just go around it, and like that works. That worked back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it would have worked here. So it's really silly that they decided to just be like, no, everything is open, and it's just this hellstorm.
Yeah, like you could it's a full 360 access to the base. It's kind of wild. Like, it's kind of wild, and it's kind of bad.
It's just silly. That's just flat out silly.
Yeah, so, it'll be a while before, because I'm going to spend this entire time, because, going up that incline to get into the proper fight is where, the enemy starts ramping up what they send at you, and you start learning all your extra objectives. So I'm just going to spend the time, working on my forces back here and building them up, which is going to be, the lion's share of this video, which is fine, because that gives us plenty of time for Dark Eldar lore chat. I think I've pretty much laid out what the problem here is. The game will reveal 2 other bases. I will be ignoring them completely. And I will be
good man.
And I will instead be doing the most Dark Eldar way of doing this mission I can possibly imagine. And yeah, so let's talk about the Dark Eldar and Commorragh in particular, because I think it's always worth sort of noting that, these guys, at least the people who were previously in charge of Commorragh, were a lot of them the ones who are by and large responsible for the fall of the Eldar. So we always go back to the fall of the Eldar, the birth of Slaanesh, when after the Necrons went to sleep after the War in Heaven, and the Silent King went off to try and go on a galactic adventure, or intergalactic adventure, and discovered, oops, Tyranids. It's all Tyranids out there. The Eldar were just basically like, well, we're the greatest thing in the galaxy now. Nobody can really stand against us. And our weaponry is so amazing, even if someone were to try and attack us, we could obliterate them in seconds. Obviously, the Croc, or the Cork, or whatever they call themselves, were never any danger to them, because they didn't seem to really, care about them either. And so we got this situation where they slipped into decadence, and they slipped into getting more and more freaky with it, in indulging their own selfish pleasures and things like that, to the point that their incredible psychic powers caused a ripple in the already very ripply Immaterium. And through this, a great tear in reality opened up that is known now as the Eye of Terror, but is symbolic of the very first breath that Slaanesh drew upon being born, a breath that drained the souls of more than half of the Eldar race.
Yep.
And the Dark Eldar avoided this primarily because they were not in real space. They were off in they were off in the Webway. In particular, they were in places like Commorragh, which were little stronghold places set up away from prying eyes, where they could, indulge in whatever they wanted and be protected from others who might want to indulge whatever they wanted using them, because they were already fairly, self-absorbed, backstabby kinds of people. And so, as a result of this, as we said before, the Dark Eldar are a little weird. Slaanesh does still try to take their souls, but Slaanesh only nibbles on their souls, like a little bit torn away at a time as they go old. But because of their bond with Slaanesh, due to Slaanesh's birth being their responsibility, at the same time they have discovered that they can inflict suffering on others in order to replenish that soul. It's kind of like this, it's kind of this wonderful, wonderful thing where, they're damned, but they're damned good at it.
It's a good way to put it.
And as a result of this, they started to coalesce these fragmented little colonies together, essentially just like creating gigantic dimensional connectors. So Commorragh might have started as a much smaller sort of thing, but then, another guy's sector got connected. It's like essentially just a giant like slice of real space where you step from like one side of the galaxy to the other in like an instant with no discernible like feeling of having traveled that distance. That would be like what it is. It's like when in Galgaigo when they do the dividing driver, but in reverse.
Right.
Like they're bringing things on the outside closer together.
This is one of the primary things that people tend to struggle with when I start talking Dark Eldar to them,
Yeah.
Because they're just like how are these people even worth mentioning if they really only hail from one city, and it's just like, well, the word city is a little bit weird, right? So this is a city that exists outside of the usual space, the usual spaces, and it's basically a liminal space in and of itself. It isn't necessarily bounded the same way you would expect a city on Terra to be. And the easiest thing to compare it to, which is potentially an even more nerdy illusion than Warhammer 40k itself, is if you're familiar with D&D and Planescape, Sigil's City of Doors, right? Like Sigil is a city, but it's also so mind-bogglingly vast that it kind of ends up being a plane unto itself, and that is functionally how Commorragh works. It's like, yes, it's one city, and yes, there is like one supreme ruler of that city, but like just because he's the supreme ruler doesn't mean he has complete control over every nook and cranny. It's like saying that because the judges in Judge Dredd are judge, jury, executioner, and have supreme power, Mega City 1 is fine. It is explicitly not. It's like the entire point of 2000 AD and the Judge Dredd universe. Mega City 1 is not okay.
It's a place where even if you're on the main path, your safety is not guaranteed.
Right.
And so one of the things is interesting is that they didn't consider themselves the Dark Eldar, or as they are more commonly called now, the Drukhari. They just considered themselves the Eldar. They still thought of themselves as the Eldar. They didn't worship the gods anymore. They basically went, oh, the gods got eaten? I guess, they weren't worthy of being gods. And so instead, they started to do a form of, not quite ancestor worship, but using the example of particular Eldar of their past who had done particularly selfish, gruesome, nasty things to essentially say, oh well, these are the people we have to aspire to. These are the people who in their existences made everything they basically exemplified what we should be. And so they didn't actually
not necessarily worship, but definitely veneration.
Yeah, veneration. So they didn't actually start calling themselves the Drukhari / Dark Eldar until Asdrubale Vect came along. And so this is where, and originally before Asdrubale Vect came along, as I said in the last video, it was the nobility. It was the people who owned these webway holiday hotels that were starting to get, dimensionally bolted together. They were vying against each other and they were already starting to. They had already very quickly realized the only thing that was keeping them functioning was other people's like negative emotion. So they basically started going out and you know and pillaging people, and you know people going out on raidings and things were either tied to a noble house or attempting to appease the nobility, and would often find that you know if they got something particularly good or juicy, like a noble house would basically be like, well, we want that now. And you wouldn't really get to have much of a say in that because, well, you didn't cross the nobility. Because you crossed one, the rest of them would all turn on you in turn. Like, they didn't like each other, but they didn't like other people getting in on their business. They like that even less. So, Asdrabale Vect starting out as a slave, and it's so funny when they talk about it. They say, you know, they mentioned in the timeline, one day a slave looked up at the sky and swore that he would own all of Commorragh, and that was that man was named Asdrabale Vect. So always be careful who you mock in high school, because they might one day turn out to be riding a really cool like flying dice of destruction. And he somehow managed to claw his way up through a combination of guile and brutality, a lot of guile. A lot of people would not even realize he was working against them until it was too late. And he would always be aware of like the Dark Eldar capacity to just stab one another in the back. Again, they weren't called Dark Eldar yet, but you know, he probably thought of them like that. And so eventually, he was like, he managed to get himself out of slavery. I don't even think they mentioned how he managed to do that, and formed...
There's a lot of Vect story that would be incredibly interesting to read about that has not been written.
And you know what? They'll probably do a novel series on it eventually, I'm sure, if they haven't already started one. And he has... And so at some point he founded the Black Heart. The Black Heart. You know, the group that essentially would become his cabal. And so they worked as a sort of a lesser mercenary group under the nobility, and they managed to work them up to a certain level that gave them access to a particular raiding zone. Now, it's interesting to note that at this particular point in time, we've gone quite a significant distance into Imperial history, because by this point the Horus Heresy has already happened. Like, and a lot of the legions had been turned into chapters, and so they were in a particular space that pillaged a certain naval lane that, like, Imperial transports and other things would travel down. And typically, before Vect took it over, they didn't do too much raiding. They were very careful with it because they didn't want to attract the Imperium's attention. They just wanted to get their souls and have fun with that and not worry too much. And so they didn't want to actually provoke a big response, because that would cut off, you know, their supply of like, you know, quotation marks, food, which is actually very sensible. But Vect, understanding this, also used that to his own advantage and actually started very much more openly, more rapidly raiding that region. And what that resulted in was an Imperial response. In particular, a battle barge, I believe, owned by the Salamanders, or a cruiser owned by the Salamanders. I'm not sure which it is, but anyway, it was a big Salamander ship. And when the Salamanders went into attack, the Vect and his cohorts, having expected this, disabled the ship from the outside. They had weapons and stuff that could basically just shut a ship down, jam its communications. It's how they would raid all these other ships and no one would know what happened. And they and pulled it into the webway with them. Straight away, having gained the prize of Space Marine captives, the Eldar nobility said, "Give us that." And Vect went, "Yes, sure, lords, please have it, take it." And so they put it in their own docks. They kept the jamming systems and everything in place. And the one thing that none of the nobles had ever considered is that the Salamanders did have another way of communicating. There had been no attempt to stifle psychic power. I think in the original version of the Dark Eldar, they loved hunting and killing psykers, even amongst their own number. But in the revision that happens later, it seems that as a result of the birth of Slaanesh, they just don't get psykers anymore. But as a result, Dark Eldar are typically like the physical perfection of Eldar. So yeah, they still fall over to a breeze, particularly if the breeze is shooting bolt guns at them. but they're they're basically as strong and as fast and as deadly as an Eldar can be, which is good for them because that's they really do kind of like jumping out of nowhere and stabbing you in the throat several times and then like moonwalking back out again. So we got sorry, the mental image. So we got.
I mean, yeah, the moonwalking back out really did it for me.
Yeah, they just So they had the style and the agility. All Dark Eldar can moonwalk. So they they can all dance. Don't worry about it. And they don't worry about enjoying dancing too much and then like accidentally falling into dancing like the Craft World Eldar do.
I mean, look if falling into dancing, I imagine if they can do the moonwalk, they can also do the lean.
Yes.
The big ass lean from Smooth Criminal. You don't have to worry about falling over. You can manage that without nails in your shoes.
Vect does the lean every day because he can, and so he does it in the speeding dias as well. So as a result of this, here it begins. By the way. You can kind of realize I had a thought as I was doing this. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to give this map any of the respect it deserves, and everyone can see what I decide to do about this problem. Like I start forming. This is an experiment. I'm like, can I get away with this? Can I do this? So
I think I know what you're thinking, and the answer is bloody no.
One of the quirks of these shrines is they actually do shoot at you. Right, but
that is one of their shrines. Their horror spells will enter through it.
I'm like, oh, he's shooting me, but what if I disable it? I don't think I do it this time, but I will do it. But look how much damage we do with just one, right?
Yeah, that shrine is taking a lot more damage than I thought it would. I'm gonna be real about that. I thought it was gonna require a heck of a lot more firepower to take down.
Well, it's definitely going to require a little bit more than just the one. So we're gonna get ready on that. But getting back to the story,
Squadron of 3 will do it.
as a result of this, firstly, the and this is always so funny. The nobility gave access to the ship and orders to clear the ship back to the Black Heart because oopsie-daisies, it turns out it's actually a lot harder to kill Space Marines on one of their own ships than these guys thought, and they taken significant damage as a result of it. And so Vect and Co were like, yeah, no worries, we'll take care of this. And so Vect started essentially drip feeding the troops that he wasn't certain were loyal to him into the Space Marine ship to get killed. So basically, he was trying to drag this out as long as possible, and he was dragging it out for as long as possible because eventually a large Imperial rescue force composed of various Space Marine chapters punched into Commorragh and started attacking. And so basically, Commorragh took a significant amount of damage, and the best attempts of the Dark Eldar to try and like capture these new arrivals did not go well either, as the Space Marines disgorged from their vessels and started fighting. And in the end, a significant amount of Dark Eldar nobility, particularly the ones who owned the docks that the Space Marine salamanders had been thrown to, were wiped out. And the general public feeling towards the nobility had like dropped to the lowest level they'd ever been. And as a result of this, yeah, and as you can see, you can turn off the attack like you can turn off a turret. That was pretty much the game changer for me. When I realized you could do that, I was like, well, okay, now I know what I'm doing. And Vect and his crew rallied to help push the Space Marines back, and the Space Marines got their thing and left and everything like that, and they closed off the webway gate so that the Space Marines could not come back, and a few Space Marines were taken as slaves.
At my strength, I am strong, for here the warp is strong. It is our power and your weakness, and you shall die.
Okay,
Is he still talking?
he is still talking.
He is still talking.
And so through this, Vect was able to advance himself further and further and further until eventually he was on top. And what this meant was everybody else answered to him. The Cabal of the Black Heart became the the nobility essentially was like torn down. Anyone who was like part of the aristocracy, they were made into cabals themselves, and he basically just pranked them with their own greed into like letting Space Marines in and getting trashed by them, and as a result of this, he popped into the new position. The aristocracy was was dismantled, and as a result, it was basically just a cabal system. And as I said before, survival of the strongest. So long as you weren't so strong, you caught Vect's attention. I appreciate this bit because like one of the big problems with this map is like you go to areas and it's like they lay like it's kind of cute. They lay basically a trap for you there. Pink horrors and stuff will appear to attack you.
Just zooming.
But I was going past. I wasn't trying to lay claim to that location. I'm trying to
You're not interesting or funny.
Yeah, I'm just sort of moving away and around as much as I can. Because you can come in from some different angles to take care of these. So as you can see, I'm sort of coming around from behind. Again.
There it goes. And yeah, that was really the biggest difference between Vect's Commorragh and the Commorragh that had existed before. The way you can envision Commorragh before Vect is like basically a bunch of pirate ports that loosely work together. So think like the Tortuga that you would see from something like Pirates of the Caribbean. Only there were an innumerable number of them, and each one of those ports had their duke, as it were, like the person who was in charge there, and they were strong, and they were on top by virtue of the fact that they owned the area. And particularly strong nobles would own a number of these ports, right? Well, rip those guys. But after Vect, everything all really fell under Vect's purview, and he had a much more I hate to say meritocracy sort of setup, because merit to a Dark Eldar is a very twisted thing. But nothing truly belongs to you unless you can prove it on a day-to-day basis. And you generally prove it by being able to kick somebody else's face in. So stuff changes hands all the time. People get get lazy all the time. They get murdered all the time.
Yeah. Oh, and it's probably worth noting. I was like, I knew I was missing an important detail. What actually got like the cult of the Black Heart, as they was originally called before they were transformed into the Cabal of the Black Heart, is originally like they sort of rose to ascendance because they played a fairly strong role in a conflict where those who owned and controlled the Commorragh's sons, because Commorragh has some sons and they were stolen. They were straight to give you an idea of how dangerous how dangerous Eldar technology used to be. They quite literally stole sons and put them in the webway, and so
nobody else was using them. That means they're ours to take.
And the folks that owned the sons basically started to clash with the noble houses, and turned off the sons. And so the nobles attacked them, and the cult of the Black Heart sided with them, with the nobles, and rose up in importance. And that's how it sort of eventually came. And over time, in order to consolidate his power, one of the things that Vect did was he also started to force more and more of the unconnected enclaves of different Dark Eldar nobility to become connected to Commorragh. So he essentially didn't just consolidate power, but also consolidated more and more territory to himself. And so that was really, Commorragh really sort of grew from that point. And he was quite capable of also turning that off. So folks from the nobility who still held out, he would often, basically he would do stuff like shut them off from everywhere else, and then using those same gates that connected to other areas, like drop like a malfunctioning like an Imperial like battleship on that enclave, and detonate their warp engines and basically just wipe that section from reality. Like, he really knew how to manipulate the systems that he was using.
It's like on one hand you have to it's tempting to consider Vect another one of those people who are just magically smart for the sake of the story. But on the other hand, one of the beautiful things about the Dark Eldar and the way that they do business is that the more you read about them, the more you can really get a sense for how Vect managed it. When it gets down to it, Dark Eldar nobility is not complicated. It's actually quite simple. They want souls, most powerful souls that they can, so they live longest and are personally strongest. Okay, cool, great. That is something that is never going to change. And with that in mind, they start to become more and more predictable just because of their own vices, which is an absolutely beautiful way to set it up as well. Just because like if you want to predict somebody, one of the things you can that will always work in your favor is predicting them on their basest instincts, which is exactly how the Dark Eldar work. They are base instincts incarnate. It's a pretty clever and beautiful way of setting it up, and it adds a certain thoughtfulness to a oh no, another dark elf faction.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things I always find about the Dark Eldar in particular as well is, see, going around here has kind of opened up a region where it's like, oh, you gotta destroy the things. Don't build defilers. There's one that like builds talons and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, all right.
With the flying vehicle for the Eldar.
Make more.
And they don't send too many at us. I don't know if it's because of how I'm doing things or what, but we just don't really get too many of them. The thing we have to worry about more is when the game decides to do more of its sassy, drops an entire like dangerous army directly on top of your base thing, which we'll see soon enough. This particular shrine is going to be the hardest one for me to deal with, unfortunately, because like I don't stop to try and destroy the turrets, which I really should, because it would make subsequent trips easier. And although they are parked in a position where it looks like they could shoot, just because of the wackiness of flying stuff, you have to be you can't have those partitions in the way in order to do it. So, unfortunately, it'll take me probably like 4 or 5 goes to get that done. But that's okay. We're doing Dark Eldar chat. Let me in the past suffer and us sort of move on. But the Dark Eldar are also not even remotely because you kind of see it with a lot of factions, like the Imperium, Orcs, even the Eldar themselves. They don't really get along with like other alien species. Like the Tau are the only faction that we'd really known of before that really were accepting of non-Tau within their ranks. Well, the Dark Eldar as well are quite happy to make use of like the worst of the bunch of different races. They are not even remotely opposed to hiring out alien pirates, raiders, bounty hunters, etc. to work for them. So if Commorragh is actually a bit of a cosmopolitan place in terms of aliens as well, like the Dark Eldar outnumber everybody else, but you'll actually find some very, very different, very exotic sentient alien creatures that you would normally know of anywhere else, wandering around doing horrible things to one another. It's quite an interesting sort of thing. Like people, they aren't necessarily bound to do these things the same way as the Dark Eldar are, but the Dark Eldar are more than happy to pay these people what they want, and are more than capable of paying these different alien groups what they want. to the without like having to like worry about being betrayed or anything like that. Although they frequently do, because everyone's still a little bit too greedy for their own good. So it's like the Dark Eldar are good on paying people, is what I'm trying to say. I'm like, if 2 didn't work, what if 3? I really should have just destroyed the turrets on the way, but like we'll get there.
Probably should have, but if 2 didn't work, what if 3 is actually a pretty reasonable plan, especially considering that they're not exactly repairing the damage to that Chaos Shrine.
Yeah.
So like that's, I don't know, like compared to the annoyance that would be tromping over the entire level doing this garbage, I'd say you're doing it right. But that is another particular bit of art imitating life and life imitating art that I've always appreciated. I made the earlier allusion to Commorragh being like a big, massive interdimensional Tortuga, and that also was, yes, it was absolutely a haven for the worst scum that you could imagine. But it was also one of the only places where you would find people from warring powers or whatever just showing up, hanging out, having a beer together, because that was all anybody cared about. They were also very cosmopolitan in the same way that the pirate ships that supported these men were in a lot of ways the first democracies. This is an interesting point in that on a pirate ship, when you were in battle, the captain was God. The captain had absolute authority. But the instant a fight was over, the captain served at the pleasure of the crew, which was completely 180 degrees from how every other boat on the water worked at that time. Similarly, like the places these people ended up making up were really weird and really new and really interesting. And Commorragh is much the same way. I think there's even some like special add-on splat books for Commorragh in Rogue Trader and Dark Heresy stuff, precisely because it's one of the places that has a lot of writing potential.
Yeah, the Dark Eldar feature fairly heavily in the I think it's the Calixa sector, which is where Dark Heresy takes place. There's a lot of like older sort of things there. I'm just going to double check that, because I did notice there was something that had like a bit of information up about that.
Yeah, it was something like
no, it's in
like
the
that.
yeah. It's there. There are some elements of it in the Calixa sector, which is like the sector of space where Dark Heresy takes place in, and also the Coronis Expanse, which is where the Deathwatch role-playing game takes place. And I believe it's within the Coronis Expanse. There's like a particularly large place. Yeah, here it is. Like essentially an exiled Dark Eldar Archon found I'm not even sure if it's like an old space station or whatever, but it's infested with like just insane garbage. But slowly but surely, they've been sort of getting in there and cleaning out more and more of it as the place gets larger and more people come in, and so it's apparently it's called the Galen Sphere. Here I found it, and it's apparently from the age of technology, and it's just like full of like old like turret systems and everything from like the glorious days of the Imperium. And so they've been just slowly sort of like clearing that out and to trying to sort of to build up it. And the Calixa sector isn't far from the Coronis Expanse, so like they often get referenced together, which is why it sort of got brought up. They're excellent books, by the way. Even if you're not like interested in like playing the games, like the splat books and the extra books and everything are so fascinating for this. I tried to come at it from a different angle to see if I could pull it off, and it didn't work any better.
Yeah, I didn't think that was gonna work.
It's fun. It's very like, if at first you don't succeed, let's try a slightly different angle.
But the again, when we're talking about like what are the base like believability sort of things that you're talking about, and one of the basic things that makes the Dark Eldar interesting on a very fundamental level is precisely that. You go back to the fact that the Dark Eldar really only want one thing, and it's disgusting. Like they want souls, and that's disgusting, right? But precisely in the pursuit of doing all of that, you know, they get all of this other stuff. They like the technology, the like hard cash, all of these gubbins and odds and ends that mean absolutely nothing to them.
Yeah. Like, the flesh crafting is probably the wildest and most interesting thing, I think, about the Dark Eldar. Sort of a subsection of it. Like, the homunculus don't tend to, unless they, like, want particular samples, they don't often try to go out and get out on raids and things like that. They're happy for somebody to basically, you know, give them stuff in exchange for flesh-crafted monstrosities they may have created, or other sorts of, like, tricks and other things they've made. You know, Talosses to make it easier to clean up slaves and things like that. So they're sort of like, they're like a different sector, like you might call them, a different sort of cabal, and I find that sort of, again, like, it's all in the interest of, like, you know, living long and living strong, and even in death, it's like you come back because you've paid somebody to essentially keep a little bit of you in some jars and, like, smooshing them together and then, like, making someone miserable next to it so you grow back up again. It's like, it's kind of funny, but there's this hilarious punishment amongst the Dark Eldar in that if you've really pissed someone off, they can pay a homunculus to make you physically look like a human. And apparently that's, like, literally the worst thing that can happen to, like, a Dark Eldar, is to be, because they have a real loathing of humans, because humans kind of have a similar sort of resemblance to the Eldar, but also by the same token, they absolutely aren't as, you know, are as quick or as strong or as clever, etc., etc. But by the same token, the Imperium of Man is still prolific. It's still expanded outwards. It's far more of an empire than they will ever have. And as a result, and even Vect, I think, personally feels affronted by the Imperium in that regard. And as a result, he does like to focus a lot of his attention on the Imperium as a sort of a means to punishing them for their bullshit, which I find kind of funny too. They're the villains of Brothers of the Snake. One of the villains, but like the overarching villain of Brothers of the Snake. And I would say Dan Abnett does such a great job of, like, keeping them weird and alien to, like, the Imperial perspective. Like, it's really, actually really good. And, like, yeah, here I fuck it up again. I'm like, oh shit, this is...
Yeah, like, you told them to attack that thing like 18 times, and they didn't the first 17. I'm only placing that one on you a little bit.
Yeah, but in the end we get there, and I think there's only one more left to get.
Yeah, there's only one more left, and, like, this entire area is just absolutely swarming with dudes.
Yeah, like the waves keep getting worse and worse, and that's kind of also what makes having to do this worse and worse. It's because you might make the mistake of attacking the further away stuff last, at which point you're halfway across the map and they send, like, a giant mob at a distance that is much shorter between your base and theirs than your base and your troops. And then again, and as I said, then you've got to find your way back, and some of your guys might get hung up on other troops that come wandering in or other things like that. It's just, it's miserable, so I'm doing it this way just because it's, like, going to make me a lot less miserable. It's still going to make me miserable in its own different way. But, there's way more of that yet to come. The trick with turning people into humans, though, has actually also been exploited by Vect in order to send the Inari problems. Like, he'd find out about the Inari, so he'd have infiltrators, Dark Eldar, masquerading as humans. Because apparently, like, it's really funny, but you can convince a Dark Eldar to do literally anything if you make them look like a human, with the promise that you will change them back. You could get them to eat just about anything, eat this sandwich, you declare, and they'll be like, yes, I will eat this sandwich. Please change me back. And so he would use them to
Stop making
infiltrate.
me look like a monkey.
Yeah, he would use them to infiltrate and tell planetary governors or commanders and stuff like that. Oh, sir, here's the intel you wanted. Oh, it looks like there's a secret build-up of Eldar here. I think they're trying to cause problems.
Die today!
I'm just sort of showing off the
Alright.
base and how fast it kills you.
Calm down, Sparky.
Base will kill you, fools. I'll tell you when the time is right.
I felt like I should at least show everybody what that like dialogue sounds like and what the actual base looks like before I like try and drive around it again. And so yeah, so that's been like another thing. Like Vect has been real hard on the Imperium, but also very hard on trying to exploit the whatever he can to kill the Inari as well, because they're once again a threat to his unified rule. And and he's tried a lot of different stuff, and I suppose I better very quickly talk about it as well, because unfortunately we are just going to run out of time to talk about literally everything about them. But we did mention the Incubus before, and the Incubus is the bodyguard of the Archon in here. They are, again, like, similar to the Homunculus, a different kind of cabal. They aren't solely devoted to, like, slaves or anything like that. What they are Dark Eldar who have decided to master the blade. Master combat. That is more what they care about than anything else. They will still get empowered by other people's suffering and things like that. But what they want to do is they want to hone themselves as just like the ultimate fighters, which is a little bit different to the cults, the witch cults, in that the witch cults are there to also do it in an incredibly entertaining way. There's a lot of like bravado and everything on the line there, whereas it's just purely about fighting. And the most famous one of all the Incubi is Drazar, and to the point that a lot of people think that he might be Ara, the fallen Scorpion, the original Phoenix Lord of the Striking Scorpions, who inevitably he fell. Some people it's like the Eldar, the Craftworld Eldar. I think he just fell because he fell to chaos. He let power and savagery be the rule of the Striking Scorpions, and it was only when Karandras took over that they tempered themselves as better behaved, more patient and things like that, and patient, stealthy. And the idea is that apparently Ara went to the Dark Eldar after a while, and sort of he taught them how to fight and everything, and that's how the Incubi were born. And then he left them again, and no one knows what happened. And then one day, this suit of armor named Drazar, not even named Drazar. Drazar is just like the title they give to like the non-leader who's still considered to be like one of the most powerful of the group. So that's his name just by order of his position. He never gave a name. He very rarely ever even acknowledges people speaking to him. Like only the most most senior and skilled in the group does he ever even acknowledge is around. But he turned up one day in the Incubi and just basically challenged them to fight, and killed again until they finally were like, well, okay, do you want to lead us? Because you're clearly the strongest guy here. He's like, no, I just want to be here. And so they made him obviously he didn't speak when he said this, but they made him Drazar, Master of Blades, and so that's his name is his rank. And he's an interesting character too. But there are one of the theories about him is that his armor is completely empty, and that would make him a Phoenix Lord, because Phoenix Lords are empty suits of armor, just utterly littered with soul stones that essentially can completely consume whoever puts it on, and the predominant personality of the first person to put that armor on is the one that wears it all for the rest of time. And so yeah, that's like, because no one's ever seen Drazar even take his helmet off, so they don't even know if Drazar is a he. but the general
ease of address, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess the best way to put it is the general assumption is Ahura, and Ahura was a dude, and so their assumption is if that's Ahura, then they're just using he. I guess it's kind
Simple
of
enough.
Yeah, whatever. But it is interesting to note, and it's kind of cool because he's his weapons kind of just look like a pair of like a mantis scythes. He has like mounted on like the fronts of his gauntlets, and so like he's got mantis style.
There is much terror.
There is one last bit of Dark Eldar chat that I feel like we would be remiss to not mention, and might take us most of the rest of the time.
Yep.
And that is Vect's Dark Muse phase. If you want to refer to it as that.
So we talked about the inspiration thing. I'm glad you remember what they were called. The inspirational people that are looked to as instead of being the gods, they're referred to as the Dark Muses. As I said, they are the inspirations for how the Dark Eldar should live their life. So what happened is Vect died. That's how we start. That's how we start. He died, and all of his stock of literally everything was simultaneously destroyed as well, and nobody had any idea who did it. They were all like, "I'm sorry," like what's going on? And so one of these groups went, "Hey, we're going to be holding one of these cults," and a group of Harlequins were like, "Hey, we're going to be holding in this giant witch arena stadium, a ceremony for him." And he was like, everyone was like, "Oh, cool." So all the people that hated Vect naturally showed up to piss on his grave, and much to everyone's horror, a ritual was performed that brought Vect back. And looking better than ever, he declared himself a living Dark Muse, and all of his rivals who had idiotically turned up to the festival were violently killed. Not just by by the witches and by his own forces, but also by the Harlequins, which is an interesting note. So why the Harlequins decided it was so important that Vect remain alive, I'm not entirely sure. But there he was. One of the nice things about the witches, actually I should say as well, is their drug is AoE. So when they activate it on cells, they actually give buffs to everyone around them. So I've got 3, so I can sort of use that whenever everybody's morale gets dipped down, and then just turn them into fighting berserkers. So everybody just gets buffed up and gets mad, and
So I looked up this part of it because there is a particular monologue from Vect as he shows back up that I feel is one of the strongest bits of writing in Warhammer 40k, simply because it's only a few sentences. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences, and it so perfectly sums up Vect's Commorragh that everything else is interesting. Everything that we've been talking about for the last hour is cool, but this is all you really need to know to understand both the visceral impact and the cultural overtones of the Dark Eldar. So Vect is rising again, looking better than ever. Sea of blood and air of pitch, and he says to everybody in attendance, "Some of you thought me dead. Some of you even willed it, and you gathered here in the Nexus to offer feigned respect. But now you plainly see that my will cannot be undone, my favor cannot be regained, and my wrath cannot be tempered. Whether you are loyal or a traitor, you will be slaughtered. For it is only right that my ascension be celebrated with sacrifice. And if I deign to have you resurrected, know that you will serve me by your deeds or by your suffering."
Yeah. They're on, oh dear. Yeah, no, they basically he did this, I would assume, to solidify his position within the Dark Eldar as its supreme overlord. He always likes to do these periodic cleaning outs of his problems. But as you can see, this first attack is not going well. The sheer number of enemies that are actually in this space far outstrips anything that I could possibly build. And also, I think we also get attacked by some people coming out of the Foundry. I didn't link those guys up with any group, so that's probably just as well. We need to start rebuilding everyone immediately.
Yeah,
Luckily, none of this
You were at both 2020 pop caps before that particular assault. I'm just
Yes.
throwing that out there.
Yes, and now I am not. I haven't even bothered to go get the relic either. Like, I'm like, just like, whatever.
Yeah,
So-
like
Look how many there are. Just, that is way
That
beyond
is
what, like, an
altogether
average
too
player
many
would be able
dudes.
to build. But yeah, some of them have already come down to fight, but that's okay. I've got, I've got defenses to build, troops to send in. I think all those warriors just died. Yeah, all those warriors just died.
the answer is don't worry about it.
Yeah, no one's really gonna miss those guys. They were a necessary speed bump. Dear. I mean, that just sums up Vect in all ways. Really, is that like he will absolutely just use how others see him and how others would react to his death as a way to, like, further just like solidify his position. Like even you couldn't even guarantee the impossibility of his death, because like a lot of people at the time would have just been just like, no, there's no way he's actually dead. Like there's no way Vect is actually dead. And a lot of other people like would have turned up for the memorial almost as a means to be just like confirm it. And unfortunately for them, they didn't realize just how far he was actually going to go for the whole thing. And their
Just according to
attendance-
Keikaku.
Yeah.
It is important to note that in the run up to this entire thing, like it was an incredibly confusing thing because like people were aware Vect had multiple homunculus shards and everything like that, and just one day everybody wakes up and Vect has been assassinated, and all of his homunculus shards have been destroyed. Like, and it's confirmed that they're destroyed because like the homunculus in charge themselves got murdered, and their laboratory got pillaged, or like the homunculus was off world somewhere, and the rest of somebody came by and blew up the laboratory from elsewhere. Blah blah blah. Like
I long.
plots within plots within plots in Commorragh. People had multiple confirmations that no, this is real. Vect is dead, and everybody was just like, "Holy crap! Well, what happens now?" And which was a very good question, because at that point, Vect had been ruling Commorragh for something on the order of 8 millennia. My memory is a little bit fuzzy, but this happened sometime in the timeline for the 41st millennium, and Vect canonically took power sometime in the 32nd millennium. So he's been around for like 8,000 years, and then all of a sudden just whoops, done, poof.
Yeah.
And this entire thing where there's this weird resurrection ritual undertaken by a bunch of harlequins that is completely unprecedented. Like, to the best of my knowledge, that happens literally nowhere else. Nobody would have had any clue that the Harlequins would even have had that sort of power. I mean, and maybe they didn't. Maybe Vect is in reality, not simply the dark muse that he claims himself to be, but a demon prince of Slaanesh. Possibly, it would fit a lot of the ideas here, and it would fit, but who knows? Who really knows?
I mean,
Vect isn't telling anybody.
We've seen the incarnation of the God of the Dead appearing, as well for the Eldar. So who's to say that his status and his position and everyone's belief that he was an unassailable overlord that would always rule over them couldn't be manipulated in some way to not even necessarily make himself. And this is all 100% pure speculation, which is also what makes it so fun.
100% speculation.
None of this is canon. None of this is true. But it's like
We're lying.
he could be very well be. He could, when he says he's a dark muse, he could mean it literally as in he has become a living god, basically. he could be a demon prince of the Dark Eldar for all we know. I mean, it's not impossible, is it?
Yeah, no, it's not impossible. But like the Dark Eldar were already responsible for creating one god. You know, and they haven't changed. That's the other thing is that when their habits, and specifically their habits, because remember the Craft world Eldar saw the birth of Slaanesh and was just like, okay, well, we screwed up. We've got to change our ways. That was their conversation. The Dark Eldar said, "That was hilarious," and then they went back to doing really hard drugs, torturing people, and having kinky sex. Like that was their character arc, as it were.
Yes.
They've been doing the same thing to Vect for 8,000 years. Who's to say?
Yeah.
Who's to say?
Yeah, it's cool, and I dig it. And I also like the note. I sort of looked it up as well. Before they started killing everyone, just to make sure no one could really ever fight back, they basically just pumped the arena full of hallucinogenic drugs. That's very on brand. They're very fond
that's incredibly.
They're
on
very
brand.
fond of getting everybody like high on like horrible like hallucinogenics, and it's just like just making everyone suffer for it. So this attack's a little more directed because not only is it like I'm just sending in like the Soulstorm to just sort of chew away at everybody, but I've given my my Ravagers, the anti-infantry guns, which are actually really quite potent. And since there aren't really that many tanks and stuff to deal with here, and I can just send my flying boys in for. These guys will just drive in and just annihilate all of the guns of all the obliterators and friends with like big shooties.
Yeah, that was one thing that I was definitely surprised about with the specifics of this particular mission. It's like Iron Lore suddenly remembered that obliterators are scary because like obliterators
they dropped a lot of them, didn't they?
Yeah, and they don't show up in basically any other thing, right? Like you fight chaos a lot in Dawn of War. Obliterators very rarely show up. But Iron Lord is like, hey, remember how these guys literally choose the best weapon for every situation, and they don't die? That's kind of scary. And so now there's just like a jillion of them, an actual jillion. This is a scientific term.
They even dropped them like directly on my front lines last time. That's why most of
I saw that.
Like most of my my retinue were dead before we even did the big attack because that happened. So it's just like you can't hate them.
It was a very good thought in terms of providing a good threat profile to attack. Now I just wish they had put that same level of thoughtfulness into the rest of this.
a bit of a shame, but like
I have
this is going to be the
forgotten how stupid the rest of this is.
Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of ways they could have done this, and like I didn't, because I did the scummy way of doing this, which I still think is very Dark Eldar.
I'm fine with it.
Like you didn't get to see an example of why that's difficult, so you just take my word for it. It sucks. Or you can play it yourself. I slowly raised the gun and pointed at the audience. Play Soulstorm, I dare you. I fucking dare you. Play on modern Soulstorm, you son of a bitch. You want to come at me? You want to come at me with fiction I've just concocted in my head about how you'll react? Yeah, that's right. That's what Soulstorm did to me. It'll do it to you as well.
All I'm gonna say is I looked very closely at the minimap throughout this episode, and I very distinctly noted that there was a massive sea of red that I am pretty certain would like teeters on crashing the engine, not the computer, the engine. Just like after a certain point, the software itself just gives up. and it is like, sorry, too many dudes. Too many dudes on the dance floor.
Can I say, though, in terms of too many dudes on the dance floor, this level still chugs way less than the Chaos version. Just like in Dark Crusade. The Dark, like, we were like, man, the frame rate's getting a bit chunky here, and I was like, I can't do anything about it, that's just the engine. Not doing anything like that.
I can't imagine why. Like, I genuinely cannot imagine why.
Yeah. No, like, they've obviously Iron Lord did something right.
Yeah, like there's so many dudes, and there's way more particle effects too.
Yeah.
Like every time you kill a dude, it turns into another particle effect.
Yeah, Soulstorm, at least in that regard, doesn't shoot the bed. It will shortly, though, because we're about to win the mission.
Yay!
And I am going to do that thing I said is like extremely annoying and tedious. So here we go. Okay, yep, we finished the mission. Cool. Let me just save the game real quick. Yeah, here we go. I'm like, I really should save it because I know what's coming, and this way I'll be able to show the outro as well.
Yeah, because if in case somebody's forgotten, it frickin' crashes.
It crashes at the end of every stronghold,
when he does
and at the
this.
end of random missions.
No! We cannot lose! We cannot die! How can we?
Without our devotion, without our sacrifice.
Oh, the horrid blossom of chaos will wither! We'll die! This world is slipping from our grasp.
Oh, there it is.
Whoom.
Whoop, 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 whoop,
Yeah.
whoop, whoop.
When the Dark Eldar first arrived in the Commorragh system, they had been happy to conduct the raiding parties against the Alpha Legion as often as any of the other warring forces within their grasp. However, the Chaos Space Marines' position directly below their moon-based stronghold was simply growing to be too great a threat. Archon Terrell took all but 2 leaders as fools in the Commorragh conflict, Farseer Keris and Lord Charon. These 2 alone might know where in the shadows to look for his fleets of raiders and ravagers. As the Dark Eldar power grew great, Lord Terrell saw his chance and decided to wipe the Alpha Legions from the system. With ruthless speed and efficiency, his savage forces descended upon the peninsula of Isolt. The savageries and abominations of chaos, rather than dismaying them, merely whetted their appetites for slaughter and mayhem. Although the Alpha Legion fought heroically, they were overwhelmed and outmaneuvered. The Blackheart Cabal raiders took cultists and wounded Chaos Space Marines by the hundreds, dividing their spoils between tribute to their masters and use in a great feast of souls to follow the victory.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard the Alpha Legion described as fighting heroically.
Yeah, and also please enjoy like low poly, poly Dark Eldar.
That hell mask is still the stupidest freaking thing I've seen in a month.
Yeah, so there you go, everybody. That is the Dark Eldar taking on the Chaos Stronghold, in all of its glory. You know, as you do.
Heavy air quotes glory.
So to explain what happens next, I will be doing some mod content. Don't expect it immediately after the week after the release of this one. they've just only just like in the last month or three released a new update for the unification mod. So I'm gonna probably just like sort of sit down with myself and sort of get it all together, installed and everything, and figure it out and play it for a while before I do it. I won't start any other like Let's Play projects until I get this done. And what I want to do is I do want to show off a little bit of it at the very least. So that's what we can look forward to next time, because like I said, there are some really fascinating things that even in Dark Crusade got done on the modding scene for Dawn of War that got carried over into Soulstorm, and I'd like to show that off at the very least, alongside some of the absolutely insane things that people have been still working on even to this very year. So until then, I've been the Last Robo-Kai.
And I have been Cool Guy.
And we'll see you all next time with more Soulstorm, only weirder.